Barnaby Jones will return next Thursday night at 10, 9 Central and Mountain on most of these stations.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Always happy to welcome Dan Jurgens back to Word Balloon. I'll give him a crackpot subject, and he's like, yeah, I'll come on. Good to see you, man. How are you?
I just keep coming on because I hope to actually finally see that Barnaby Jones episode.
A Quinn Martin production.
That's right.
Tonight's episode, murder at the docks. always murder. Fade into murder. You know. You gotta love those shows, Dan. I mean, we're close enough in age, you know.
Oh yeah, I did. Now, probably more because Lee Merriweather was on. She was the daughter-in-law, I think.
Well done, Dan. You are right.
Thank you.
It is his daughter-in-law.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Man, it felt like that show was on forever, and not in a bad way. It was, it's one of those typical kind of detective shows of the 70s. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that was after they had all the. I'll phrase this correctly. After they kind of ran out of all the handsome guys, they said, now who can we get that looks a little different? So let's get Buddy Ebsen. And then you had Cannon and Ironside and all the rest. So yeah, they just tried to mix it up a little bit.
That's funny. Although I'm sure William Conrad would be pleased to be described as handsome or whatever, or he's saying he came afterwards and was part of that other wave of, although I always say, and Dan, I don't know, I forget if you're an old time radio fan or not, but William Conrad was like the Spencer Tracy of old time radio.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's incredible. And every now and then you still will find them playing something and catch that voice, which really was good. I mean, great voice.
Resonant voice. Yeah. And then, you find out when you're an adult that he was the narrator on Rocky and Bullwinkle as well.
Yes.
So you ever hear those outtakes of Rocky and Bullwinkle?
No.
Oh man, they're on YouTube. If you look for Rocky and Bullwinkle outtakes, and William Conrad will laugh at the drop of a hat, and he's got the greatest high-pitched laugh that, you could tell he really is tickled by the moment or whatever.
Okay, I have to do that. I'm making a note right now. Seriously, I've got to check that out.
No, I'm here to help you with time wait.
Yes, all right.
Excuse Dan. It's my pleasure. So, hey, I am thrilled that Batman First Night obviously succeeded so well, and the trade is out here. This is one of my favorite covers. It's an alternate cover, but
oh yeah,
that's awesome. That's great. And man, you guys really captured that moment. You and Mike Perkins, the spirit of 1939 Detective 27. I mean, it's a fantastic story.
Thank you. And that was really the goal, which was we go back to when Batman was first created, use that world, use that environment, and play around with the idea that he has probably only gone out in costume a grand total of 2 or 3 times. I never bought into the idea of a hero going out on patrol, nightly or anything like that. I think that's a bit much. I think it would be more special than that. But when needed, he did what he had to do. And the world of 1939 is so interesting. I mean, not only do you have World War II coming up right around the corner, you're at the end of the Great Depression, although they didn't know it yet then. Many people would argue it is the greatest single year in film history, which I think is very dependable as an argument. So it's this real interesting time. It was a pleasure to work in it, and it was a pleasure to work with Mike, who was willing to go to extraordinary lengths in order to capture the time period. Because it's much easier to draw the car that's sitting, just drove by your office or studio right outside that is, 2025 vintage or whatever, than something from, say, 1935 or 1925. And Mike committed to it in a way that few artists could.
And I remember when I was talking to you or Mike, where somebody had a model of Batman's red car. This is pre-Batmobile, or at least the first car that Batman was driving around. It probably was Mike then. Yeah. And I mean, it's like, oh my God, there it is. Because I loved the Batman encyclopedia that Michael Fleischer edited.
Oh yeah.
Put together. Yeah, it was so great. And so you got the history of the Batmobile that way.
Yeah.
And he even had panels and things. And, at first, there was a little attempt at a Batmobile with like a hood ornament that was shaped like a bat. But otherwise, it was a typical kind of roadster. And it really wasn't until the 40s that we got the big kind of like a Hudson. Now that I know a little bit more about vintage cars, that's what that black, big kind of oversized Beetle with the big bat cow catcher on the front of it.
Right. And one of the things we did in the story was to give Bruce Wayne the little 2-seater hot rod, which again is an actual highly prized vehicle. Whereas when he becomes Batman, he basically just gets in the red sedan so he can kind of hide in there, which kind of makes sense, if you will. But it also was a way to play up to that that idea that people had about Bruce Wayne and kind of the assumptions they made of him as just this lightweight kind of playboy guy who had this money he didn't deserve because he didn't earn it. His parents did, things like that. So again, it was a lot of fun to work on. It has just been collected, and the hardcover,
zoom in.
go this way, just came out last week. So it's out there if you want it all in one nice hardcover book to put on the bookshelf.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's excellent. And it really, again, just as I like going back, and I hope the same treatment will happen with Superman as we get closer to the public domain situation for him in Action 1. But I do love these early ideas that you didn't need a supervillain per se. I mean, you had the Monster Men, you had the Chemical Syndicate, but certainly, you didn't have the Joker, you didn't have some of the other the classic, cast of villains that eventually pop up in the book.
Yeah, the closest you probably got at that time is Hugo Strange, who then disappeared for decades, and I think it was Steve Englehart who first brought him back, right?
I believe that's right. Yes.
Yeah. And so you find the worth in that. And again, what I like about Hugo Strange, as well as the stories that they did then, they are very much of their time. And it is this idea of monster men and, kind of the backdrop of how can we use science to influence these stories and the specter of all that. Whereas just a few years later, of course, science would play such a big role in the end of World War II. And, so we're a little more distrustful of that now, but back then it was that total faith sort of that they had in it. That was really kind of cool and charming.
Did you go back at all and look at, because Matt Wagner also did a few Batman stories that kind of expanded on what we originally got in Detective. I don't know if you wanted to look at that or stay away from it.
I remember reading it and liking it very much at the time. This time around, I made a conscious decision not to look at it because I wanted to make sure that we were on our own path. And what we really wanted to stay true to was the spirit of those original stories. And I think I was very captivated by that because I've always found it fascinating that those stories are so different from the Superman stories of that same era. And even right from the get-go, you could see the very stark differences, not only in the characters themselves, but in the tone of the stories, which is really kind of fascinating that, back then, as they were just driving so hard just to get the material out in what would later quickly become a studio sort of system, that the characters managed to stay as different as they did.
Also, man, and after you say that, I think about the films of that period, and really, you're right. Like Superman really was like an Edward G. Robinson or a James Cagney kind of journalism movie, a movie about newspapers and civic issues and stuff. And Batman, a little pre-noir, but essentially gangster movies and and back alleys and those
Yep.
kinds of things, and
Yeah,
then as you
it
say
was.
too, the mad scientist kind of angle.
Yeah, well, yeah, they played very heavily with, as I recall, the mad scientist bit, which again was kind of fun. And there's always a useful foil to be found in that, I think, because really what the mad scientist does, to me anyway, is sort of reflects other norms or hopes of the time or fears of the time, as the case may be. And that's part of what makes it all work.
No, I get it. That's excellent. And again, it's so beautifully drawn. I mean, like you said, Mike's attention to detail. I mean, he clearly gets into it. As much work as you gave him as far as research, he kind of dove in head first. And I mean, the newspapers, they look real. And I mean, it's Mike really Mike always has kind of a realistic style, but compared to, like, say, Swamp Thing, that maybe has more of a license to be a little more surreal in
Mm-hmm.
the approach that he did with, like, Rom V in that series. No, this is pretty brass tacks, and can side next to an Alex Ross book in the
Oh
same
yeah,
way that
and
like he did.
that's really what we would hope. And this idea that we saw this as something of a bookshelf type project right from the start, saw it very much as something that I think will also appeal to the European market. That I think a more bigger superhero story type things tend not to be as welcome there as something like this. And also period pieces in general are something that they're more receptive to in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think it fit that very much. And that's where, when we decided on the format, as far as whether we wanted to be traditional comic book size or the more square 8.5 by 11 type sheet of paper, Mike was definitely intrigued by that, because again, that's how we saw it, as that European sort of flavor.
Have you been to Europe a lot, Dan, in your years? Have you gone to a lot of
Not
European
enough, but
conventions?
yes, I have. And it's always fascinating to go see the various comic book stores that exist there, and just how things are treated. And they are, much more bookshelf oriented in general. And it is much more about the idea of coming in that book and the wide variety of genres that are there. And I'm still authentically impressed by being able to go there and see science fiction stuff represented in a way that it just isn't here, as well as American Westerns. And that's what's really fun to me, is seeing that sort of stuff. And I'm always blown away by that, and just the incredible difference in the two markets.
I agree, and man, I discovered Lieutenant Blueberry, Mobius's
Oh yeah, yeah.
series back in the '80s direct market era and everything, and thank God it really did. It opened my eyes to this wider world of comics, and it's something that even to this day, I mean, it really just kind of made me more excited about the other genres and the way they're exploited. But you're right, even Black Sad, that fantastic. Noir that was a foreign piece. I believe either French or Belgium, but it had that animated kind of Roger Rabbit look to it and everything. But it was definitely a noir with a bunch of animals and things. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a great example. But yeah, no, the art, the different artists, the writing, it's really exciting, and I hope that the translations that we get are as faithful as they can be to the
I
original.
think that we've gotten to the point. Well, I can't say for sure, but I think they are. And it's so much better than it used to be. I remember a time, and again, this does go back to the 80s, but being at the point where you might pick up something here in the United States, but then find another American translation, I think in Canada. I remember being in Canada and picking up a couple of things and saying, okay, these are both in English, but they're different, right? And I do think all of that is improved now. Those are really, I guess, sort of the embryonic days, and all of that I think has been taken care
That's cool.
of.
That's
Yeah.
great. I when I was emailing you about coming out tonight, I was curious because I've been watching Superman and Lois, and
Mhm.
this being the final season, I'm like, all right, because I'll be honest, I mean, there are things about it that I wasn't crazy about, but I have to say, I've always appreciated their inventiveness when it comes to their take on the classic villains or whatever. The whole Bizarro thing last season
Yeah.
was excellent. What do you think of the show in general before we get into the nitty gritty?
Well, I have genuinely always liked it. I think that a couple of things, and one is their commitment to Clark and Lois as human beings, I think, is really right along the line, certainly with, I'd like to say, how I always envisioned the character. That it really does play on this idea of, I think, Superman being very much rooted in who Clark Kent is. And a lot of that is because, of course, most of the stories take place in Smallville. So, they've gone back home. Clark's home. They're there now. Lois is working as a journalist there, which still keeps her involved on that level. But I think because of that, also getting to see them as a family unit is very much where I was always going when we started doing the John Kent stuff anyway. And I think that's how you get a very different look at the character of Clark, just because how he is as a parent, which is part of, again, what makes him different than Batman, Bruce Wayne, and Damian. It's a different story, but I think one that fits the idea of Superman very well.
I'm a big Tyler Hoechlin fan. I think he's a fantastic Superman, and was the moment that he showed up on Supergirl. And it's like, oh, there he is. There's Clark Kent. There's the Clark Kent that we all know and love and everything. And, that's the hard part. I mean, I think going even back to Reeve, both Reeve and George Reeves and Christopher Reeve was making Clark matter. And, they maybe had different challenges back in the 50s, but it was, I always appreciated tough guy investigative reporter Clark Kent. I mean, I don't mind, I'm sorry, whatever, tripping over himself. And I mean, I grew up in the 70s, so, I just had Elliot Maggin on, Elliot and Carrie Bates and Marty Pasco, the way they wrote it. I love that stuff. It was fantastic. But I love the TV show for that reason. And I really think that Chris had a fun time playing the meat guy. But, that physicality that he would add to when he would like straighten up and suddenly like he seemed to grow like 3 or 4 inches when he'd be Superman. It's like, okay, now you can buy that more than the glasses, that he is acting and making it look different. But Tyler, man, he just has that good guy. Hey, it's Clark Kent. Everybody likes Clark Kent. There he is.
Yeah, and again, that gets back to what I talked about or had mentioned earlier, this idea of the very human side of the character. And certainly he doesn't carry the level of Clark Kent ineptitude nearly as far as what they did in the Reeve movies, of course. And that's fine. I mean, that was more of its time and a little bit of a stretch. But that is a theme that they're playing with even now, and was actually, central to this latest episode, just in terms of using that sense of, I can't do this, as part of not just Clark's reason to duck out from certain things, but helps to separate this idea of Clark Kent from this notion that anyone might ever think he's Superman.
All right, so you are caught up. You saw Monday night's episode?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
There's only 3 left, everybody. By the way, Pete Beiser points out the Christopher Reeve documentary that just came out. He says it was great. I haven't seen it yet. Have you had a chance to see it yet?
I have not seen it. I look forward to it, though. I really do.
Yeah. No, it's great that they did it. It's terrific that they did it. But I enjoy the show. I have to admit, I go back and forth about the kids and the way they're portrayed, but I understand. And I like the new kid that's playing John. I think that's cool.
Yep.
But I have to admit, just like the other Arrowverse shows, too many side characters that, frankly, I just don't care. I mean, I don't want to be rude, and I don't want to disrespect the actors or the writers for that matter. But it's just like, I'm here for Superman and Lois, and their sons. It's okay, but and also I was intrigued by their John Henry Irons and his daughter. I thought that was an interesting wrinkle.
It was an interesting wrinkle, and one that I think was fairly faithful to the source material, the comic stuff that Weezy and Bog did when they first started. For me, Lex Luthor, kind of biker gang, prison Lex, that one doesn't quite work for me, but
okay.
Everything else pretty much does. I just see Lex as being more reasoned and suave, and not, in agony every episode because of his daughter. He's just, to me, someone who overcomes that more easily and is able to get what he wants in a more secretive way than having to go around and threaten people all the time. And like I said, especially looking like he just got off the Harley and
oh no,
yeah,
absolutely. Here, one second. Let's see. Talk loves art says Superman and Lois really good this season. And yes, he does. Yes, apparently next week I saw the teaser for next week.
Yeah.
We're finally going to get him clean shaven. But I don't, Dan, I hear what you're saying, and initially I'm like, what's the deal with Biker Luther? But I got to admit, he's kind of grown on me.
Sure.
And Michael Cudlitz is a great actor.
He is,
and he, he proved it on The Walking Dead. So
he did.
That's great. And I'm intrigued. And also, it doesn't bother me that they've shifted the hatred to Lois, as opposed. I mean, it's Clark, but this new idea that and Lois screwed me over, and I'm coming after her, and it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting,
right? Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that helps to pull Lois into the story as well. It elevates Lois. Now, I think they end up kind of, setting up the inevitable problem of journalistic standards that they're going to have to confront. Part of it even is if Lois has been active in hiding Superman's identity and essentially writing news stories that were less than forthcoming that way, you end up with journalistic ethical problems at that point. And that is definitely something I hope they deal with.
Back when it was decided at DC and Bendis revealing the identity, how did you feel about it, Dan? As a guy that's written a lot of Superman.
I like the triangle aspect that started in the beginning of Lois, Superman, and Clark Kent with the secret identity. And I think there are just certain magical things that work for heroes that way. And it was also throughout sort of like a 10 or 15 year period where we have had so many characters reveal their identity, and DC had just done it with Superman. I'm just not sure that it necessarily works, but part of it is because for the general public out there, the public at large, they think of these characters with certain ideas. And you go out on the street and you ask anyone, does Superman have a secret identity? Yeah. Who is it? Clark Kent. And it's just one of those accepted things. And there are some things that are so intrinsic to a character, it's hard to challenge those or take them apart and still have it work.
I also think there is a adolescent feeling of everybody, of otherism. And I understand the people that truly, are unfortunately suffering from that otherism, whether it's an issue of race or orientation or whatever. But truly, I mean, as a straight white guy growing up, everyone I think has that kind of, man, if only they knew the real me. Yeah. And I think that secret identity idea tapped into that, and I think that's why a lot of us, at least the boys, I assume, again, women know watching. Kari is watching right now. Good to see you, Kari. How are you? Mm-hmm. I mean, chime in if I'm right or wrong. But yeah, I just kind of think that was an appeal. And while I understand, and Brian and I had long talks about this, and he goes, well, you're supposed to be all about truth. And how truthful are you if you got this secret and everything? And I'm like, yeah, but I couldn't help it. I'm like, I guess, and I was intrigued and I wanted to see it happen. And that's why if everyone's caught up with Superman and Lois, it's like, okay, I know there's only 3 episodes left, but he's revealed his identity on the show. And again, I appreciate these different shades of the characters, whether it's in the movies or in the TV show. It's like, all right, let's explore that. Whether it works or not is up to their writing and how we receive it. But yeah, your thoughts on all that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I agree with everything you said. And part of it is too, that is sort of the magic of having a series that is coming to an end. You can do something like that. And the way they have done it is, I think they have handled it really well. Writing a comic title that is going to exist almost weekly for the next how many years, we can't even say for sure, is a little bit of a different exercise than writing a TV series, I would say, that you know is going to come to an end with that season. So if you're wrapping it up with something like, yes, Superman is revealing his identity to the world, if you do it right, and as I said, I think they have done it right, and I think if they have done it real well with a couple of really well executed scenes, then more power to you. You are adding something different to the character that way, and we're all on the ride for that.
I'm with you, man. Dennis says, Dan, absolutely love First Night. Would love to see you and Mike reteam on a follow-up or another book. Would also love to see you draw a Black Label book. Your art at that scale would be incredible. Thoughts on a Black Label book?
I'd like to. Part of it is I keep saying yes to too many writing things that then say, if I'm going to do like a Black Label book, it's not going to come out for 3 or 4 years. But, you never say never, and it would be fun to do at some point. One of the pleasures of working as both a writer and an artist in this business is it allows me to associate with so many different creators in a different way. So it allows me and has allowed me to work with writers that I couldn't necessarily have done if I were just writing and not drawing, right? I've gotten to draw for some really great people that way. And I've gotten to write for some incredible artists who bring so much to a project that it's just a thrill for me to see the stuff roll in. It makes me work harder as an artist. So I'm blessed to have been able to work in these different capacities for as long as I have and get to, interact with creators on that level for so long.
How long has it been since you've done interiors in a book or covers even?
Oh, I've done, right now I'm doing a bunch of covers at both DC and Marvel.
Great.
Here's one on the board right now, sneak peek, as we've got Superman,
that's great.
Justice League.
That's a Justice League Unlimited cover?
Yeah. So no,
nice.
I've been doing a lot of covers. Interiors, I just had done a couple of things, last year, nothing ongoing. It's more like hit an issue here, hit an issue there, and take care of it that way. And so I try and fit it in when I can. I will say I'm kind of at the point where I would like to do like just a 4-issue stretch on something that I write and draw, just because I haven't done that for a while. And it would be fun to get back to that.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
We'd all love to see it. So that's good to hear. Because I also understand some artists as they get older are like, some I just want to do a cover. I don't want to do interiors anymore. Mm-hmm. So here, Kari, I think, has something on the secret identity thing. People try to conform to who they think they are, and that you can cause enough issues learning that someone is a completely different person than you thought they were would destroy most relationships. Sure.
Yeah, it would. And I think that's true. I also think that, when you play around with the idea of, what they set up on the show with Clark releasing or, letting go of the secret identity the way he did, what would the story have been if John and Jordan didn't have powers? Very different problem at that point. When we see, for example, the easy answer is a spy or something like that. But we have seen film on the news from time to time of, say, special forces doing something somewhere in a foreign country where the faces are blurred out. And they go to a great deal of work to hide the identities of these guys. It will come out later, perhaps. But I think there's a lot of things that happen where it doesn't come out later, and that is done to protect innocent people. And that's also something you can always rationalize. So again, if, for example, Ma and Pa Kent were still alive, if Jordan and John didn't have powers, what would this story be then?
Interesting.
Fascinating to play around with.
Absolutely, man. No, I think that's great. And then something you're not working on, but again, I think we all have to acknowledge it. The Penguin wrapped up this week.
Oh, yeah.
And Colin Farrell, just went to town and expanded what he did in that Matt Reeves movie. And I love this series. I think it's excellent. And I mean, again, he's covered in all that latex. I mean, you would know it's Colin Farrell, but he beyond the obvious of the physicality and everything, he really brings a very different role than what he's normally doing.
Oh yeah, I think it would be fascinating to see, and maybe it's out there. If it's out there, I haven't seen it, but see footage of some of the table reads. So as they all sit down and start to read through the script, where he's not under, the makeup or anything. I would love to see that, just to see what is the voice like, what is the approach like, how does it come across then? Because it has to have such a different vibe to it, right? Because that isn't there. But yeah, it has been fascinating to watch, and just so layered, and all the characters I think built out so well. I ended up liking it far more than I thought I would. And I don't know that it's not like I thought I wouldn't, but yeah, they really did a remarkable job with that.
Have you in your time ever written the Penguin?
No, I don't think I have. I don't even know. No, I was going to say I don't even know if I've drawn him, but I have. I remember drawing him in a couple of different stories. When Gotham had the earthquake and everybody broke out of Arkham, and we did a nice story that was inked by Bill Sienkiewicz, and that I think is really the only time that I've really drawn the Penguin. And at that time, it was still the monocle, the long nose, and I remember playing around with the silhouette of the monocle and everything. But fascinating character, and you talk about adding layers to a character's complexity. Well, this certainly did it big time.
Absolutely. And, they went a similar path with the Gotham Fox TV series. But I personally, I couldn't, I don't know. I didn't buy it that was Oswald Cobblepot in the Gotham series. And maybe because, again, of the physicality that Colin Farrell's version gives us. I don't know. But even though it's different, you don't have the pointy nose and the aristocrat kind of vibe or anything. But yeah, I don't know. Your thoughts on Gotham and comparing it to the Penguin?
Well, I wondered, not necessarily if that was an influence, but they must have been exposed to that a little bit, just because. And I did like the Penguin on that show. I thought it was an interesting, different take. He was younger. He was a little bit more slim, but he still had that sort of that disarming sort of approach that I think he could have, just with this weird little smile and everything. I'm sorry, the actor's name is escaping me, but I thought he did well with it. And it did add something to the show that I liked, which is so often it's easy to go down that road of Gotham and Batman, where every villain is just this dark, psychotic sort of approach. That's the easy out too often. And Penguin in that show was not that. And so because of that, and his mother was on the show, which I really enjoyed. So that was interesting to me. That made it different.
Have you watched the new animated series that's on Amazon?
No, I am behind on that one as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, then I won't say anything, but they also have an interesting, different spin on the Penguin mythos. And I'll leave it at that.
No, I'm aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So no, I have not caught up on that one yet.
Yeah, Dan, I didn't think I'd like it, but it kind of works for me.
Okay.
It really, and truly, the way they did it and the way they present it all, and it at the same time of gender swapping, it also it goes back to the Penguins' kind of not aristocratic, but kind of, again, I don't want to spoil what they do I'd love for you to see it just to get your thoughts on it. But yeah, it did it surprised me. I'm like, oh yeah, actually I'm okay with this. This is all right. And it's because sometimes I think any sort of gender swapping just for the sake of doing difference, it's like, okay, most of the time it doesn't matter, because a lot of times it'll be done to civilian characters that maybe aren't as fleshed out. And right. But when it comes to some of these characters that we've observed for decades, it's like, okay, well, you're taking a big swing, and I applaud the effort in the swing. But yeah, it's like, all right, let's see what the execution's like. But as you know, that group of writers that was being story edited by Ed Brubaker and stuff. Rucka was there, and Mark Bernardin was there, and a lot of our friends that are like,
right.
They know the character, and they know good TV writing. So
absolutely, and yeah, that's why it is, and we all have these list of shows to get to at some point, the at some point often gets pushed farther and farther down the road, but it's there. John, winter is coming, and once winter comes, then it's time to sit down and catch up with some of it.
Oh, I understand. Absolutely, man. Yeah, shut in time. And especially, my God, you guys are 20 degrees, colder than Chicago up in Minnesota and everything.
You can say that, but the coldest I have ever been is in Chicago. That wind, come on. You don't
have to tell me, Dan. I understand, man. Yeah. Mitchell has an interesting question. With the recent Golden Age Batman work you did, is there any chance at another job of a Golden Age hero from any publisher? Dan, there are so many great heroes of the 40s that are in public domain. And I loved what Dynamite was doing with the Black Terror and some of these other characters and the redesigns that Alex Ross gave them and everything. But yeah, I think that I'm with him in terms of, boy, I could read several different, great stories about heroes in the 40s, and there's plenty to choose from. So any thoughts on, or even like going to Marvel's Golden Age with any characters?
Yeah, I find period pieces like that to be really interesting anyway. I have always thought that, and it's one of the reasons a year and a half or so ago I did a Tarzan miniseries for Dynamite that was set very much around the time, again, of Tarzan's creation, just like with Batman, because there's something about that works. These characters fit into that milieu of their birth, if you will, I think a little better than today. Tarzan being a classic example of something that would not work as well in today's world. We just know too much about Africa. We know too much about, everything that's happening there. So, to go back at these, different points in history and look at how is the world being affected, what is the story sort of behind just these characters, and they don't necessarily mean, here's where the Justice Society goes to fight World War II. I think it has more to do with what motivates them on an individual level, and how does it make their individual character stories so cool. And that's why over the years, I have liked some of the Sandman stories that have come out from DC so much. You've got the one that, Rob Venditti has been doing just recently, but there's something about this guy, in a gas mask, and the trench coat and everything that just fits that time very well and is very interesting.
I'm so with you, man. And truly, I think First Night has a lot of similarity in the best way to what Matt Wagner and Guy Davis and Steve Siegel did with that Sandman Mystery Theater.
Oh yeah,
and like down to taking those original Sandman stories that were 10-page stories and expanding them to 6-part miniseries each chapter.
Oh yeah, and it was an awesome book. And along with that, Guy Davis's art just fit it so well. Where if he were all of a sudden using the same approach, style, and technique on something that was happening, well, that must have been around like 2005, 2006.
Even earlier, I think. I think early 2000s.
Okay. But, so if it was taking place at that moment, I'm not sure that the art would have been as appropriate for it, whereas of its time, it was just a perfect fit. And gosh, and there every single issue too. I mean, that's what I appreciate about it so much, because that's what I think pulls readers into that fictional world even more.
You could almost, again, being a fan of old time radio, you could almost hear the organ playing mood music as it was going on. I mean, it really, if anything, and certainly, I'm sure the Sandman was created with the idea of the shadow pulps.
Probably, yeah.
But they really capture that spirit in Sandman Mystery Theater. It's absolutely perfect that way. No,
yeah, it was, and the fashions, everything about it was spot on. So that was a great series.
No, I couldn't agree more. I would love to see you maybe get the opportunity to do some more Golden Age kind of stories, because it seems like you understand the psyche of some of these men and women of that era.
Yeah, and I think also once you start to really dig in and do the research, all that does is open up more ideas and potential. And then once you have all those files assembled I'm making it sound like a stack of paper. It's not anymore. It used to be, not anymore. But once you've done all that, it's like, yeah, there are always ideas for more, and where can we take this, and what can we do with it? Because that world continued. It's not like it went away. And even to the extent of one of the things we talked about with Batman First Night is originally, Mike talked about doing it in black and white, or just tonal work. And I said, well, Mike, they did have color in the 1930s. I mean, Wizard of Oz came out in 1939. It was in color. So, you have that potential. We'll just do it in a more subtle way, which is why that's how we found the palette we did. So it's a little bit more washed out. It makes it feel older, but it's just once you start to go through the process of even having that conversation and making those decisions, yeah, you want to kind of continue with
it. Did Mike do the colors?
No, Mike Spencer did. So
okay.
Yeah, and it's very, very nice, and not Mike Spencer, Mike Spicer.
Mike Spicer, okay.
Yeah, and it's wonderful, and I still owe him a drink because we beat him up a little bit in the beginning. We went through a couple test page sequences that really went over and over until we got it right. That can be a frustrating process, but boy, once you hit it and you hit it, then you're off and running.
That's cool. Mentioning Tarzan, I meant to ask you, you ever see Tarzan's New York Adventure?
Oh,
that
yeah,
movie?
Of course.
I say that's like literally, and of course Tarzan is a superhero as well. That's like a great kind of prototype of superhero movies because you got really Tarzan gallivanting around skyscrapers and jumping off balconies and, it's great. And Weissmuller still, was in enough of his prime that it's like he pulled it off in just the loincloth and jumping around like that.
Although he looked good in the suit too.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
The big shoulder pads and everything else. Yeah,
sure.
He looked good in the suit. So yeah, he managed to pull both off very, very well. Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time though. I should check it out again.
I've been trying to coax Alan Weiss to come on the show, the great Marvel artist, among other things.
Yep.
And we had a really long conversation. He still hasn't said yes, but at least he's talking to me. And we were talking about Buster Crabbe, and he loves Buster Crabbe. And I get it because Buster's another Olympic swimmer like Weissmuller was. But I really do love Beyond Flash Gordon, all the Westerns he did, and his Captain Gallant television series when he was from the French Foreign Legion, all that stuff. It's like, he never gets his due as the great kind of pulpy hero that he was, back then.
Yeah, that's probably true. I would say that when it comes to Tarzan, Weissmuller feels a little more like him just because he's got the size, that Buster Crabbe does not have. And I think
that's fair.
In my head, I just look, if you're going to take on the apes, take on a gorilla. Yeah, okay, you need that bulk. Okay, so that's just how I see it.
No, I get it. I met him. It was in the early '80s, around when he did that Buck Rogers cameo.
Okay,
with Bill Gerard and everything.
Yep.
And no, you're right. I mean, he had the thinner swimmer's body and everything. He'd be a tall man though.
Yes,
and he was impressive. Did you ever have the chance to see him in person?
I did not. Not, and I remember around that time. So if we're talking Buck Rogers, and
early 80s.
Remember, there was a period where you would see his name on like a convention here or there, something like that, I believe. But I just was never at one of those. It was a very different convention scene then, obviously.
Well, I was going to ask, honestly, Dan, because, I've seen, footage from cons in the 70s and early 80s. And I know, obviously, there was much more of a flea market aspect to it.
Yep.
What were the panels different than the way they are today?
Well, they were certainly a lot more informal and therefore probably revealing. But they were different. And I think it was because, you just sat at, now we have stages, right? In a lot of conventions that we end up sitting on. Back then it was just, you sit behind a table at the front of whatever hotel sort of function room, something like that. Maybe, 60 people in the audience. And so it was more conversational in nature, a little bit more of a back and forth between fans. And, fans could ask whatever question. And social media didn't exist then. So generally, if you ask a question, you got some kind of an answer that I think is a little more meaningful than we tend to give today a lot of times. So, they were very different in nature.
Okay. Caesar of Rome said, first of all, I know I say this every time you come on, but thank you for Brewster Gold. And then he also said, seeing Fire and Ice made me happy.
Oh, okay, sure.
So, absolutely.
Yep.
Any plans to come back with new Booster stuff?
I don't know. I'm always up for it. And I think it's also one of those where the timing has to be right. I had done a Blue and Gold project here a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That came out, and that was a lot of fun. I think right now it's probably a question more, and this is usually what happens if a character is ever under option somewhere. They kind of wait to see what is going to happen with that, because that's when you want to do something.
Sure.
So I think we're still in a bit of a holding pattern there.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. And we'll see what I don't know if James, if there haven't been any photos of Booster showing up in the Superman movie yet. No. Okay, very good.
Yep.
Well, we'll see. That's great. How about the Marvel side? Boy, I don't know. And is the door still open for you at Marvel?
Oh yeah, I'm actually. It's funny because they're coming out with a new Star Wars series that I'm doing covers on. It's a new series that Mark Guggenheim is writing, and it was funny because Mark emailed me to say, I didn't know you were doing covers, and I said, I didn't know you were the writer. so yeah, and that's called. I think it's called Jedi Knights, and so that's coming out fairly soon. Doing covers on that. So yeah, I'm still doing stuff there. In fact, I just did something. They're doing like a jam issue of Thor, or that's my understanding anyway, where different artists are all going to do one page, and I just did that like 2 weeks ago. So yeah, still doing stuff there.
Okay, I mean, and you've had great runs on Cap, and you've had great runs on Thor. And we even talked about one from the pre 2010 period, around 2008, that I had never read and I thought was excellent and really enjoyed it. Are there Marvel characters you haven't hit yet that you'd like to do stories about?
Yeah, I mean, and I think I've said this before. To me, Fantastic Four is one of the perfect concepts in comics, just because, again, and this goes back a little bit to what we had talked about earlier, which is it's a family unit where if you want to tell a story about, Reed and Sue, having a disagreement because someone didn't, unload the dishwasher or whatever, or Ben, tried to do it and he broke the plates, or they go to the negative zone. That's pretty expansive. And when you have something that offers that kind of expanse in telling a story, that's about as good as it gets if you're a writer. And I've always been fascinated by Tony Stark. And I have been, long before the movie portrayal, which was perfect, by Robert Downey Jr. and everything else. But there's just something about Tony. He's got this nice edge to him that I like, so different from Superman, Clark Kent, and that sort of thing. And I find characters that have that difference. That's one of the reasons I did Booster the way I did. Just give me a character that has that sense of difference to him from everybody else in the room. And I think that's what always intrigues me.
I'm really glad you mentioned the Fantastic Four, because then I think of the crossover that you did with Alex Ross with Superman.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And what was that? What was the title of that?
It was just Superman Fantastic Four.
Okay.
I don't know that it even had another time. It may have, but yeah, that was fun. And on that one, that's where I penciled the cover. It's a wraparound cover with Superman in the FF. Alex painted over that, which was very nice of him to do. Made us all look a lot better. Thank you, Alex. So that was a pleasure to do, and a lot of fun. And we actually got to do it as a treasury-sized edition, which was also very important to all of us on that, because in my head, if someone says DC Marvel crossover, I still think of the first Superman, Spider-Man. I still think of Treasury sized edition. And that's why to this day, I still want to see them take the X-Men Teen Titans one
Sure.
that Chris and Walter did, and just print it Treasury size, just to satisfy me. Okay. So just, even if you do just one copy, I'll buy it.
You know, I was Mark Miller and I were going back and forth on social media a couple weeks ago, and he brought up the Avengers issue where it was the Wasp and Yellow Jacket's marriage.
Uh-huh.
And the first time I saw that was in the Treasury edition of the Avengers, and they had the first Vision story when he was a pawn of Ultron's, and of course Ultron's creation. But then it also had Even an Android Can Cry, and then the marriage. And it was in this Treasury edition. Those are my first Avengers stories. And I know the Galactus story in Fantastic Four that they did as a Treasury edition. That was my first Fantastic Four. And I grew up on the cartoons, but I think actually buying the physical comics didn't start for me until the early 70s. And great value in the Treasury edition, only $1, and those giant, things. Now they would take, in that case too, they would enlarge, the original issues, and of course, seeing all that Golden Age stuff that DC was cranking out, those first editions and stuff, was a real education, but also just a neat appreciation of the difference of comics then and now. But I think more of those first editions, and I also noticed that although I'm sure they're coming out in regular size, that DC is putting out facsimile editions of a lot. I mean, and they do it every few years or so, but it seems like they're doing it again now with some of the early Golden Age stuff.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but they've also come out recently with a couple of Treasury-sized editions, facsimiles of the original Treasury-sized editions that they did, which is, I think, an awesome idea, because you just see it. And if you think back to when we would have bought those and they were like $1.50.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we could get them is because they were racked differently than comics were in those days. And because they were more expensive, they sat there on the shelf longer. So, if you saw it, you could say, wow, Superman and Spider-Man, not only would you want to pick it up because of that, it was just so big. And again, for $1, like, I think the first one had maybe 92, 96 pages of story and art. That's a hell of a lot of value for the money. I mean, come on. And it was just magic, right? It was just a magical sense to sit down and read those things, because the size alone made it feel special. And then you add the level of quality to it all, and that just drove it home as well.
I'm so with you. I always tell the story of me being in the Wisconsin Dells with my family, and at a gift shop, they had the Treasury edition Shazam Captain Marvel, and it was the white covered one.
Okay, yeah.
And my dad saw it first. He's like, "Hey, Captain Marvel, I used to read that. Hey, it's only $1. Do you want this?" And I'm like, I was like 7 years old. I'm like, "Yes, please." And it was great. And he was just as excited to read it. And he's like, "Look, there's Dr. Savannah. Oh, and there's the Marvel family." He goes, "I remember all this stuff."
That's awesome.
It was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, big bonding moment. I think that's why I still am into comics, is because my father clearly loved them as well. So.
Oh yeah, and I remember. So I was a kid. At one point, my grandparents had a classic cabin on the lake, and one time I was there, and again, I was probably like 7, 8, and I found a box of old comics, all from like 40s and stuff. So they all had that old musty smell. Most of them were coverless. But that was my first exposure to Captain Marvel at that point, because there were a couple of coverless Captain Marvels in there. And I remember just going, who is this? Kind of having that reaction, because the style of it was so much different than what we were even seeing, say, like 1968, 1970 or something like that. But I was automatically intrigued by the character, and I thought something about it was cool just because, the kid says Shazam. And then he turns into the guy in the red suit and white cape. Cool. And sometimes it works across all generations.
Growing up when you did then, when new heroes would suddenly appear. Would you be intrigued by the idea of a new hero, or did you stick to the, I'm a Spider-Man reader, I'm a Superman,
Oh
Batman
no,
reader?
all the time, all the time. If there was something about new that I instantly liked, because I felt like I was in on the ground floor, had nothing to do with perceived value. Oh, it's a number one, and nothing like that. That didn't even exist at that time in terms of the school of thought. I was just intrigued by, who is this? And boy, this is interesting to me. And I would say, not always interesting. So I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. But usually it was just like, holy shit, what is this? This is interesting. Who is this character? Am I going to see more? Am I not? Usually the answer was no, because they didn't. New characters had a hard time taking off.
Sure.
But when it worked, it worked. And that was always a joy. It's something that we as an industry really need more of, because one of the reasons those things worked is, part of what was interesting is, how would that character fit into a DC or Marvel type of universe? What happens when this new guy meets Daredevil or Spider-Man or, a Superman or Batman? How do they fit? And I think that's what always attracted me, was seeing these new characters come through in terms of a DC or Marvel. And that's where, and the same extended to new villains. Most new villains, granted, they don't take off, but when they do work, it's great to see that way. And it's something we need more of.
It's funny. I've been reading in Marvel Unlimited. I've been going back and reading certain books, and it is funny, the different costume villains that kind of came and went and only had maybe one or two appearances, if that. Yeah. It is interesting. Have you ever talked to Englehart or Starlin or some of the other guys in terms of coming up with that stuff when they did?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I'm fascinated by it, and we all kind of, it's, when you're sitting around at night, one of the fun topics is, aside from talking about how you work and how you go through the process of just doing what you do to build a page or a story, is the story creation is sloppy business, right? And when everyone wants to ask, where did this idea come from? There's sort of this fictional idea that it was a nice, smooth plane that, you have an idea, you start at point A, and boom, you get to the end of the alphabet and it's there. No, creation is like this, and just up and down and back and forth. And it's sloppy business. So to get into it and talk about it, yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, I had this idea for a villain. I thought it would be great. And I'm 2 issues into it, and I know it's a disaster, and I got to get rid of him and never have him again. It's all over the road that way. And other times, you luck into something with a concept that you don't think is going to have legs at all. And 3 years later, you're still doing it somehow, some way. And that's fascinating too. So yeah, I love those discussions.
Here, Kari says, that's something that would be great to see come back, try and resurrect some of the characters that didn't make it then in the now. It's questioning to see something fail. And then Caesar says, bring back the corrosive man.
Bring back Paste Pot Pete.
And the trapster.
Yeah, there you go. A little easier to say.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And of course, the various Stiltmen that we've had over the years. So
yeah. Well, and see, then, and you're on that. That's true too. So if we start to see too many of those characters, or too many versions of that character, well, then that falls apart too, because then all of a sudden you've had 3 or 4 of them. For me, that's Parasite on Superman, right? That we have had so many different Parasite characters within the context of the Superman series that it's like, it became meaningless to me. And if it is to me, then I assume it does to the readers. And no matter how hard you try, you try and find a way to make it work. But if all of a sudden you're on Parasite number 4, you've probably missed the boat.
3 clay faces over the years.
Yeah. That's another example. Yeah. When it goes that direction, then it tends to, I think, lose something along the way.
I'm with you. I was wondering too. I just republished an interview I did with Rags Morales around the time of a New 52 when he was doing that year one look at Superman with Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
And, you came in and, took over for Perez on that New 52 Superman and in the
Right.
regular Superman monthly and stuff. So now looking back at that period and that Superman and everything, what do you think of that whole New 52 experience with Superman in particular?
Well, it's a couple of different. So if you look at what they were doing as compared to what we were doing, they're two very different stages of the character. So I thought what Grant and Riggs did was fascinating because here's young Clark Kent in Metropolis, right? And it's not like he's living in a swanky apartment. It had sort of a Peter Parker vibe to it to a certain degree, which I thought was awesome. So if it's the t-shirt and the jeans, and I thought all of that worked very, very well and everything, that was great. And when we were doing Superman, and I remember when they first asked us to do it, because George had done, I think, the first 6 issues and stepped aside, and he was very unhappy about it. And before I said yes, I had said no. And part of it is because I talked to George, and he said, they're not going to let you do what you want to do. It's not going to be your Superman, that kind of thing. And ultimately, that was sort of true. And part of it is because if you come from a background where Lois and Clark had been married, as they had been in the previous continuity, if you will, and then all of a sudden they aren't. And in fact, they don't even really have that much of a relationship. Part of what happened in the New 52 in general, and there was a lot of good stuff there and a lot of good ideas, but at the same time, I don't think readers understood the context of how these characters all fit together because I, as a writer, didn't. And I think that was true of most writers. We were on the phone all the time. Have these guys met or not? And we could never even get, the same answer on that. So it felt like a very disjointed sort of universe. It's not to say that we all have to adhere to continuity all the time, but it is to say that when you have a universe of characters, people want to understand how it fits. These are puzzle pieces. They want to know how it fits. And I do think we lost something there. And so with that, Superman, even as I worked on it, I think George was right. Is a guy in the costume, but not quite the Superman that we knew. And of course, George and I had worked together on Action and Adventures of Superman back in the early days of the Triangle era. So I knew exactly what he was saying, and he was right.
Also, it seemed like, as I understood it, the editorial edict was not to have connections, and that these are all rebels, and that really it was, and it seemed to be too opposite of what DC had built in those 70 years or so of continuity, where it's like, no, DC is like the family group of superheroes they all are friendly and congenial. They all like each other. They're all whatever, and they all, when they cross paths, and it's a happier place. In fact, even when Busick did the JLA Avengers with George, really, like all the Avengers are like, what is it with this place? It's too clean, it's too happy. Everybody, there's so yeah, it almost seemed like editorially they wanted to push away the connections.
Yeah, and there is truth to that. And the part of it was the messaging on that wasn't always consistent. So, for example, you certainly got that feeling on some books, but not other books. It's Batman and Green Lantern didn't change much. It was still as it always has been.
That's true.
Part. And then if you start to ask very basic questions, so by that time, had Superman and Doomsday fought? Had the death of Superman existed? Well, if you're going to tell everybody that no, it didn't, it's pretty hard to tell people that, something that sold multiple million copies no longer exists. I had even, because I was doing Green Arrow, and we specifically asked, had Hal and Ollie met and gone on their trip across America? Specifically asked that. And at first we were told, yes, they had. Okay, great. We can refer to that. Well, we were 3 issues into it when we were told, no, they had not met. The hard traveling hero stuff had never happened. That is something that, it had appeared, 25 or more years earlier, but you've kept it in print all this time. It's one of the most famous stories in comics. Everybody knows it. People refer to it. And you can say the characters didn't have those experiences, but we as readers did, and we remember it. And that's part of what I'm talking about. It's hard to just erase all that and say that it didn't exist unless you really come up with sort of a plan to put it all back together, where you dribble out bits of information here and there as it goes along. And we didn't have that either.
I'm glad you brought that up. And also the thing about Green Arrow in particular, because that was another wrinkle of the 52 that I think there were some interesting stories in that new 52 period.
Definitely.
But Ollie kind of, I think, became more interesting because of things like Hard Luck Heroes and or Hard Traveling Heroes and stories like that, and just the mileage that piled up from when he was Bruce Wayne clone, happy-go-lucky playboy, to losing his fortune, growing the beard, having to be more of a street level guy and stuff. And I think that it made it more interesting. And again, with the new 52 continuity, it kind of wiped it away, and he was clean cut Ollie again. Granted, there was a TV show going on, and I'm sure they wanted to hook into that as much as possible. So yeah, tell me about that experience about writing Green Arrow in that period.
Well, it was one of these things where we had even gotten to the point where, as I said, we had asked, okay, they had these experiences. They didn't necessarily have to be even the exact same adventures, but you just want to be able to say, yeah, remember when we were driving across the country, no beat up pickup, that kind of thing. And I had written and drawn a sequence where Black Canary and Green Arrow are on a roof, and they're having a discussion that refers to that. Script got approved, everything, turned it in. Page got inked. Everything was great. George Perez was the inker. So George had inked it. Everything was great until they said, well, no, you can't have this because Black Canary and Ollie have not yet met. So I said, I specifically asked. And, that was the problem, that when we don't know how it fits together, readers don't know how it fits together. And so, you take the page, you throw it to the side and come up with a new 2 or 3 page sequence, and there you go. But that kind of, I think, really helps to illustrate what the problem was.
I understand. Well, I'm going to let you go, Dan, because I know you got a hard out coming up.
Yep.
But we'll remind everybody that the Batman First Night is now all collected and available now to get in a trade, and that's great. We're all hoping that again, an opportunity comes for you and Mike to work together again.
Oh, for sure.
So, in fact, here a quick comment from Parker as we're wrapping up. Just ordered the First Night hardcover. I'm not even a big Batman fan, and I'm super excited to read it. Well, you won't be disappointed, sir.
Yeah, by all means, let me know what you think when you do get it and read it. Looking forward to hearing your opinion.
There you go. And Dan, I'll bug you, I'm sure, in the months ahead when hopefully some new things are announced and gives us an excuse to come back. But I'm really glad. I appreciate you BSing. And, we sold a little product, but always good to talk to you about things in general, and always appreciate your point of view.
Always a pleasure, John. You're great, so it's always fun.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll do this again. I'm gonna try and do first of all, Mark Russell's coming on late tomorrow night to talk about his Dark Age Batman stuff. So that should be a lot of fun.
Okay, great.
So join us for that. But until next time, everybody, just you stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy. I got to find my closing here. Here it is.